So to get started with the vehicle safely raised and supported, let's take off the lug nut cover, take off the lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the tie rod end from the knuckle. That's going to allow me to swing the knuckle back and forth, and it's going to give me more room to work. Use a 21mm socket. And if it's not broken free like mine is, tap on the knuckle right here until it breaks free. Pop that off, and I like to put my hardware back where it comes from if possible so I don't lose it. Before we go any further, in order to not separate the CV joints inside your axle, pop off this cap and remove the axle nut. To do this, you can use a screwdriver or a little pry bar. Drive it in here and pry the cap right off, and use your 36mm socket and remove the axle nut. Remove the washer as well. Next, with a punch and a hammer, make sure that your axle breaks free. You want it to not be stuck in the hub, otherwise it will separate the CV joint. Before we separate the control arm from the knuckle, make sure you remove this 10mm bolt, which removes this bracket from the control arm so that the brake hose and the ABS wire have enough slack when these two come apart. Next, I turn this whole assembly the other way, now that the tie rod's off, and I'm going to undo the upper ball joint nut that goes into the knuckle so that I can move the upper control arm up. Using an 18mm wrench, loosen up this nut. If your nut is too tight, you can use a rubber mallet on the end of the wrench, just be careful. Once the nut is free, go ahead and leave it on a few threads. That way when the ball joint breaks free, the knuckle doesn't come flying down. Next, you want to hit the knuckle right here, and that's going to hopefully break the ball joint free. Be careful not to hit anything else, such as your brake hose. After a few taps with the hammer, your ball joint should have separated from the knuckle, so remove your nut. Okay, once your knuckle breaks free, make sure you push the axle through. You can let the knuckle hang and pull the axle out on the other side. Make sure it's not putting pressure on any of the two joints. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the 3 top mounting nuts for the strut. Once you break them free, you can remove them by hand. I'm going to leave the front one in for now. I'm going to leave the front one in because that one's easiest to reach. So once the bottom of the strut is unbolted, I can just reach in and remove this one. From underneath, I have supported the control arm, and now you can remove the 2 15mm bolts that hold the bottom of the strut on. At this point, you can lower your support, and the strut is almost free to move. If you just gently pry down on the knuckle, you can free up the strut. All right, take off the last mounting nut. Now the strut is not held in by anything, and if you grab it, move it forward, get the tie rod out of your way, move up on this control arm, and you can remove your old strut. So to start the new strut in, get the tie rod out of your way. Make sure that the bottom bolts line up as well as the top. As you'll notice, the top form a triangle. It needs to point this way. Put them through the holes. You pry down on the lower control arm. I'm going to start by starting in these lower bolts here. Okay, start your bolts in. Put your nuts on. So if you're using the supplied hardware, it's going to be a 13 millimeter on the bottom and a 16 millimeter on the top. If not, you can just reuse your original hardware. Torque these to 37 foot-pounds. All right, now I'm going to get ready to connect my upper ball joint to the knuckle. So I'm going to take a large pry bar and I'm going to put it right in here. I'm going to press down, bring the ball joint in, connect my nut on the bottom side. Once my nut is connected, I can let go. Okay, once your nut is on, this truck has a leveling kit. So it was a lot harder to get the nut on than on a regular suspension setup, but once your nut is on, go ahead and snug it up. Now the torque for this is 37 foot-pounds. I'm not going to be able to torque it, so I'm just going to use the wrench, make it nice and tight, and that's done. All right, next you want to put on your newly supplied strut mounting hardware. If you're using the new nuts, they're going to be 15 millimeters. The torque is 37 foot-pounds, but I can't get a torque wrench in here and accurately torque it, so I'm just going to do my best to make it tight and do the same to all three. Next, let's get the tie rod together. Torque this nut to 44 foot-pounds. Next, get your brake hose and ABS wire bracket reattached to the upper control arm. Next, get your wheel back on. Start on all of your lug nuts, snug them down, and then I'm going to torque them to 140 foot-pounds. Okay, 140 foot-pounds. And don't forget your lug nut cover.